In today's show, the definitive case for why the Blazers should do the easy thing that's actually a hard decision and just make the pick at number 3 when they're on the clock in the NBA draft. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Make the pick. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts, and also on YouTube. Thanks for making the show your first listen every day. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. Let's just call it what it is. Today's show, I am making the definitive case for why the Blazers should make the pick at number 3. The Portland Trailblazers, by virtue of moving up a couple spots in the NBA draft lottery, hold the rights to the number 3 overall pick in the 2023 NBA draft. It's less than a month away on June 22nd. And in today's show, I'm going to make the case, the definitive case for why it is the right decision to make the pick at number 3. But while making this case, which I hope to make strongly, I want to recognize, we'll do this to close the show, that the right decision and maybe even the obvious correct decision is a hard one. Harder than most teams that find themselves in this position. But first, let's start broad, get narrow, and talk about why it is a no-brainer that the Blazers need to make a selection when they're on the clock at 3. They need to just draft a really good youngster. Generally speaking, and this is the most obvious way, taking the pick at 3 is the best way to land a good player on your basketball team. Throughout the history of the league, top 5 picks are where you find the best players in the draft. There's always exceptions, but the history of the NBA, the National Basketball Association, I'll even call it the history of the post lottery association after 1985. I would say you could cut it off maybe at the merger in 1977 when the ABA came over and there wasn't like a competing league, but where really good players like Bob McAdoo and Julius Erving and Moses Malone could kind of end up. But it's like this is in the last 40 years, almost 1985, almost 40 years ago. I'm old. In the last 40 years, undeniable that the best, that just making the pick at 3 is the best way to land the best player on your squad. I've seen this sort of floating around on the internet and like in a social media graphic I saw on the website twitter.com. It was that sort of like all of the best players that have been drafted at 3, and it was a case made by a Blazers fan site. I don't have the tweet, so that this was, if you run this Blazers fan page on Twitter and I'm not giving you credit, I'm sorry. Send me an email, lockedonblazerspod@gmail.com. I'll give you credit for the next show. I don't recall the tweet. I couldn't find it quickly when I was preparing for the show. But it was like the Blazers would be crazy not to draft at 3 because here's all the great players have been at 3. And there's been some studs, right? Luka Doncic, Jason Tatum, Joel Embiid, James Harden, Pau Gasol, Grant Hill, Michael Jeffrey Jordan, Dominique Wilkins, Kevin McHale. But there's some duds at 3. Julio Okafor, Otto Porter Jr., Enes Kanter, Derek Favors, Adam Morrison, Mike Dunleavy Jr. I would even argue that like OJ Mayo, your boy Ovinton James, like really solid long-term NBA career, not and like a pretty positive outcome in terms of like overall for drafted at 3, but not what you're expecting. You're not expecting OJ Mayo. You're expecting the OJ Mayo that was a beloved character and growing up in youth basketball in Los Angeles, not the one who was like a pretty darn good role player for a long time in the league. The point of drafting at 3, the point of making the selection is not because 3 specifically is a great pick. It's not because, 1 and 2 are better, right? Like that's the nature of it. You have less people in your way to make the decision you want to make, less people to make some decisions for you before it gets to you. The point is that high picks are the best way, period, to improve your basketball team. There have been 67 MVP awards handed out. Each year they hand out a Most Valuable Player award. Joel Embiid just won it. Third overall pick, Joel Embiid. 44 times in those 67 MVP awards that have been handed out. 44 times been handed out to top 5 picks. 44 out of the 67 MVP awards have gone to top 5 picks. 39 of the 67 MVP awards, thanks to Joel Embiid's inclusion, have gone to top 3 picks. You do not have to go back that far in time to recall when someone who was not drafted in the top 5 won an MVP. You are probably old enough to remember last year when Nikola Jokic won 2. Jokic probably should have won a 3rd this year. He got my fake vote. Steph Curry, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Steve Nash a couple times, Kobe Bryant, Dirk Nowitzki. Yeah, plenty of dudes who are outside. But generally speaking, 44 out of the 67 MVPs have been top 5. 39 of the 67 MVPs have been top 3. The best way to add a player onto your team that's good in the league throughout history, the best way to find stars has been to draft them to players that were drafted highly. For the Blazers, they have rarely been in this position. Only 8 times since their inception in 1970 have they had a top 5 pick. 5 being a somewhat arbitrary number, specifically because Damian Lillard was drafted 6, but 5 for our purposes here. Sidney Wicks was 2nd in 1971. LeRoy Martin was 1st in 1972. Bill Walton, famously, 1974, the top overall pick. Wally Walker was 2 in 1976. 4 in 1976. Michael Thompson, 1st in 1978. Sam Bowie, 2nd in 1984. Who went 3rd? Blazers lost a coin flip, though. Would have taken Hakeem, number 1. In 2006, the Blazers had the 4th overall pick, Tyrese Thomas, and swapped it for 2nd overall pick, LaMarcus Aldridge. In 2007, the Blazers had the number 1 overall pick and took Greg Oden. Just 8 times since 1970 have they had a top pick. But you could argue, Wicks was Rookie of the Year. Bill Walton's, the only MVP in team history. Michael Thompson was first team All-Rookie and a 20-10 guy. LaMarcus Aldridge is probably on the Mount Rushmore. I think he's the 4th guy on the Blazers Mount Rushmore. You could probably make a case for others, but for me, he's 4, like pretty clearly. Greg Oden was, and Sam Bowie undone by injuries. Bowie had a totally competent NBA career. Oden was briefly very good, but never consistently very good. Obviously, you could fail in the top 5. That's the point of what I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make here, but the Blazers have had limited opportunities. One of the reasons you take the 3rd overall pick is because you're not going to have that many chances to get here. Even when you stink, getting a top 3 pick is really rare. The Blazers were bad for several years there in the middle 2000s. They got a top 4 pick and a number 1 overall pick, and they got the heck up out of there. You got to get it right to avoid it. You could end up like the Pistons, with the worst record in the league. They're going to fall to 5. They don't have a top 3 pick. You can end up like the Magic, who have been right there at 6 a whole bunch of times. It is rare. It is rare for any team, and has been specifically rare for your Portland Trailblazers to be in this position. Take the pick because you do not have many opportunities, and throughout league history, it has been the very obvious path to acquiring stars. Duh, right? Let's narrow it in a little bit, because I think the specifics of sort of broadly why it makes sense matters to me. This is the best path to get stars. And the MVP award, maybe somewhat cherry picking, but it was even more dramatic than I would have guessed. 44 out of 67 have been top 5 picks. 39 of 67 have been top 3 picks. Take the pick. Your best chance to land an MVP on your roster is to get one early in the draft. But for the Blazers, it's even more specific because they are a non-glamour market. They're not going to be a team that competes in free agency. And because they find themselves in a situation, sort of in this point we are in the league, in which getting players who are good and cheap matter. Let's zero in on the details of why it was going to matter for the Blazers in that second segment. But first, let me tell you that right now is a wonderful time to get in on FanDuel. We're closing in on the final days of the NBA playoffs. We've got a game or maybe 3 left in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then the NBA Finals will be upon us starting on June 1st. And so why not make a fast break to FanDuel? Because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. It's a safe, secure, super easy to use, super user-friendly. You can sign up in minutes, get going, make your no-sweat first bet right away, and then when you win some money, and you don't get your no-sweat first bet back because you won on your first bet, you get paid instantly with safe and fast withdrawals. There's no better place to bet on playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right. So I gave you broadly the case why any team with a top 5 pick, top 3 pick should just go ahead and make the pick. Historically, it's the place that you find stars. Generally speaking, you do not get many opportunities to make these selections. And even when you do, sometimes you draft Julia Okafor and Ben Simmons, and it just doesn't work out for you. Make the pick. You don't get any draft pick you are most likely to miss on. The picks that miss the picks that have the highest outcomes tend to be at the top of the draft. Make the pick. But let's dive in a little more specifically on the Trailblazers. As I mentioned, it is the best way for a team like the Trailblazers to acquire a star because for a variety of reasons. One, the Blazers are a non-glamour market. I don't like the big market, small market thing because Miami is not a big market. It's not even a big media market. Like it's not a particularly large city and it's not a particularly large media market. Glamour market is the language I prefer here. And like the reality of the last decade of the NBA is that like 8 teams are involved in free agent signings for like high level free agents. And the other 22 are just not competing at that level. You can make free agent signings. You're just not competing for the stars. If you're not LA and you're not like the big city in Texas, Houston, but specifically not Dallas and not Miami and not the team in Brooklyn, but not the team in Manhattan in New York. Like you're just not competing. You are not involved in the Warriors in San Francisco. Like you're just not involved. The only other team you could add to the list is Cleveland, and they were lucky enough to have LeBron James be born in Northeast Ohio. But for the most part, 22 teams in the league, if not 24 teams in the league, don't compete in free agency for stars. It is basically impossible to sign a star in a non-glamour market in the modern NBA. Basically impossible. But Mike, you can just trade for one. That's what the Blazers are going to do this summer. You can. You absolutely can. But it's hard because teams hoard stars. And the asking price for stars has gone way up. So even when you do draft a star like Donovan Mitchell, right? To pry Donovan Mitchell away from a non-glamour market is a hefty cost. The Jazz's best way was to already have Donovan Mitchell on the team because trading for him was incredibly pricey, incredibly expensive. It is just the cost of acquiring a star because teams hoard them and because of just, the whole point of a basketball team is to have good players on it. You got to have good players to send out, right, to make it happen. You got to have the Lowry Markkanens to make it happen. Lowry got a lot better once he changed jerseys, but you get my point. Like, it's hard to acquire stars. The price is really high. I think the Blazers, like Blazer fans and sort of me and the content creators, I don't even like that word, but like people in the media space who are like thinking about trades, it's like the more we think about it, I'm sure this is for you as a fan, like the more you think about it, it's like, gosh, it's going to be steep if they do it. It's going to be difficult to pull off, right? It's going to be hard. The best way to have a star is to already have one. And for the Blazers as a non-glamour market and as a team without a ton of assets to land a star, like the Blazers have a pretty good top-end package, but if they have that top-end package, they have so little ammo beyond that. They have really limited mid-sized contracts. They don't have their picks yet, so they're going to have to make a trade even to get their first-round picks back from the Chicago Bulls. Like, they just don't have, like, you need to have top-end talent and then to build your depth. And I don't think it seems like the Blazers are going to have really hard time building their depth, even if they build a really good starting five, which I think is at least within the realm of possibility. Beyond that, rookie contracts are cheap. And the Blazers, with an expensive roster, are if they bring folks back, we'll talk about like the sort of reality of bringing folks back. Let's assume that Jeremy Grant and Damian Lillard are on the roster in this scenario. The payroll's really expensive, and the best way to get a cheap player is to draft them, because rookie scale contracts are cheaper than veteran contracts, cheaper than free agent contracts, except for folks, playing at the minimum, right? Top picks make a bunch of money, but they're still not making star money. They're a controlled cost. And one of the best ways in the NBA to be good and sort of be good with a kind of a window is to have an underpaid player. It is to have a really good player on your roster who is deeply underpaid. One of the secrets to the early Warriors run was that Stephen Curry, not a rookie at the time, but had a bad ankles and a good contract for team purposes. It's underpaid. It's the magic of being underpaid. And the best way to find an underpaid player is have that player be a rookie. Plus, rookies have first-round picks have 4-year contracts. It's actually a 2 + 1 + 1. So 2 guaranteed years, team option. But for the most part, everyone who's like even remotely competent gets to play 4 years. Bad players get 3, but everybody gets at least a third season. And then after that, they're restricted free agents, so you're able to offer them a 4 or 5 year full max contract. So when you draft a player, you have 4 and likely 8 and potentially 9 seasons, basically a decade under team control to have the window to be good with them. Make the pick. Make the pick. It's the best way to find a star. It's the cheapest good player contract you're going to have, and it gives you a long-term window to have a quality player in your team that, based on the league rules, can't even get away. Restricted free agency isn't free agency. You can just bring them back against their will. And quite frankly, players don't typically demand trades on that second contract, before signing that second contract, I should say. Like, everyone's going to take the money from their incumbent team and then work out their beef at a later date. But you're going to have, at a minimum, even before the beef happens, 6 full seasons with a young star to prove that you're serious about it, get the most out of them, maximize the situation on both sides. And you might have 9 full years before they even hit free agency, and then you'll still have an opportunity to pay them more money. And continuing on this route, more specifically to this draft, and for the Blazers situation, the 2023 draft is supposedly stacked. Victor Wembanyama at the top is not an option, but whoever it might be who's available at 3, be it Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller or Amen Thompson, draft folks think that all of these could be like high-level, multi-all-star, if not better type of players. I'm not going to sit here and claim that I'm like deep into the draft game, but I have done a lot of reading about it in the last few days, and the smart draft people I trust are big time believers in Scoot, slightly less believers in Brandon Miller, and about that same level of believers in Amen Thompson. Scoot is, called a generational point guard, and Thompson and Miller are considered to be like potential multi-all-stars, the type of versatile wings that you want in the modern NBA, who could be impact players, if not immediately, at least early in their NBA careers, and then beyond, maybe a rookie season where it's like, okay, now you got your feet wet, but like beyond that, like good players early on in their careers. Make the pick because it makes financial sense. Make the pick because it makes competitive sense. Make the pick because it makes team control sense. 10 years of someone on the team, 8+ years of someone on the roster. Make the pick. It seems like a no-brainer, right? You listened to 20 minutes of this podcast and you said, that's where MVPs come from. Top 3 picks. 39 of the 67 MVP awards are going to top 3 picks. Helps that MJ won a lot. Helps that LeBron won a lot. But like, you get it. Like, top 3 picks. That's where talent is. Makes sense from a financial standpoint. If rookies are really good, see Ja Morant in Memphis, they're deeply underpaid, and you have a chance to kind of step above your level while you still have a cheap player under contract. The Grizzlies specifically didn't take advantage, but in general, this is the best way to get good in the league: is cost-controlled assets, players with a fixed scale, who aren't hitting free agency. And then when they hit free agency, at least you are the team that has the right to pay them. So if you want to keep them on your team, you can. It is a no-brainer. And specific to the 2023 draft, it's a bunch of good players at the top. maybe even franchise-altering players, multi-time all-stars, the exact type of player you dream of when you have a top 3 pick of adding to your team. If you could just draft LaMarcus Aldridge, like a LaMarcus Aldridge level outcome, someone who makes, 6 all-star teams and an all-NBA team, and it's like, the anchor of of several playoff teams, like, let's do it. Like, let's do it immediately. And that is like, and I wouldn't say like LaMarcus is necessarily like what people think of as like a really high-end outcome for top 3 picks, right? Like he was never in the MVP conversation. So what if the level is higher than that? Make the pick. It's an obvious no-brainer, right? Right? The problem is that the easy choice for the Blazers is actually a difficult one. It is not that simple. It is, quite frankly, it is more complicated for several reasons, and it's more complicated because of the specific place the Blazers find themselves in. Let's talk about that in the third segment to close the show. But first, let me tell you about the shorts I'm wearing right now. They're Bird Dogs, and they're darn comfortable. I am rocking the 5-inch inseams. I got the gams out. I'm looking good. The Lunchman Larry's coming in kind of like a little, like shades of gray. I'm not going to stand up and show you if you're watching the video podcast, but trust me, 5-inch inseam. I got my legs out. I'm strutting around in Oregon Spring. I'm walking a stroller around my local park. I'm getting a cup of coffee. I'm looking great. I'm feeling great. I'm getting compliments from the woman I live with. And when your wife says you look nice, that's a good feeling. That is not maybe someone who is destined to compliment you every day because they see you too much. And she says, "Hey, those are the new shorts that you got, right?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Those look really nice." I said, "Hey, thank you so much. I got them at Bird Dog. I got them from Bird Dog, kind enough to send them to me. I love the fit. I love the comfort. I love that they're like functionally athletic shorts, but they look good enough that you could kind of get away with wearing them in everyday life and not look like you're wearing workout clothes. Listen, why not see if I'm telling the truth and find out how you could get this versatility and this comfort in your life? Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. Enter the promo code LOCKEDON. They'll throw you in a free custom Yeti-style tumbler with every order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. Still a pass first point guard. Still Mike Richmond. Still listen to Locked On Blazers. You made it to the third segment, and you said, "Dude, I know. Like, I'm sold. I know where MVPs are found. I know why it makes sense from a financial standpoint to invest in rookies. I'd like team control. This draft is loaded. It's the third pick. You just have so few opportunities to end up with the third pick." Post lottery, 1985, the Blazers have been in the top 5 twice, in the top 3 once in the draft. This is their second time since 1985 having a top 3 pick. First time since 2007. Say, "Dude, I know. Limited chances, great opportunity, cost controlled. It's where stars are born." The problem is, or the challenge is, does making this pick make the decision for you? And by that, I mean, and if you're an everyday listener to the podcast, shout out to my everydayers, you know the deal. Damian Lillard has made it abundantly clear. This isn't reading the tea leaves or needing sources or whispering or this. He said it to your face. He said it at his exit interview. That's enough of 19-year-olds. If I'm not interested in building and what's next, that route is not my route. That is a direct quote. That route is not my route. And then he very specifically, when one reporter needed to lay it out for him, Dame said, "Yes, I want them to make a big trade. I do not want them to make a draft pick. I want them to make a big trade to get veterans and win." And then he said it again in an ESPN2 interview with Stephen A. Smith. Dame has been abundantly clear and out in the open and very public about what he wants. He does not want them to make a draft pick. He wants them to trade that pick for a veteran help to give him a last hurrah, a last window at being a playoff competitive team, and not like a down year, another year down and cycle back up and, okay, 24-25's our chance, baby. Do you believe? He doesn't want to believe. He wants to know. He wants the certainty of veteran help, however uncertain that might be, but that's what he prefers. And I've said on this podcast, and I still believe it, and those comments from Dame, to be clear, happened before the Blazers got the third pick. They had the 5th best odds at the time. He knew it was going to be a high pick, somewhere between 1 and 7. I think it was pretty clear that Wemby was going to change his mind, but if he didn't have the 7'5" dude with an 8-foot wingspan who's been the next thing for several years, then Dame's request wasn't really going to change. So what the challenge is that if you make this pick, and I've said this, let me get there again. I've said this on the show, and I'll say it again. I think making this pick, drafting anyone other than Victor Wembanyama in the lottery, is a signal that the Dame era is over. So by making this pick, making the no-brainer, because it's the responsible right path to do and the obvious path to get the best player you can, might be a decision to trade Damian Lillard. And to be clear, the obvious best path to the right thing you can has a million potholes. It is so hard to get the draft right. There are so many Mike Dunleavy Jr.'s out there, right? Like, you might end up with Otto Porter Jr. You might end up with, probably not MJ, but probably not Luka Doncic. But like, there are some high-end outcomes at 3 for sure, and there's certainly some really good players on the board. But like, just obviously, it's hard. It's hard to get the draft right. It's hard to get the draft right. Nikola Jokic went 41. Nuggets drafted Yusuf Nurkic before him. They traded back to get Nurk. That's the Balkan center they were excited about, not the other one who's multi-time MVP, best player in the world right now. It's hard. Drafting's hard. So while I think it is the obvious right choice, even acknowledging the pitfalls, it's still the obvious, to me, that it outweighs those things, like the risk doesn't outweigh the potential rewards and the sort of potential path they're on. The problem is the hiccup, right? If you do this, you are signaling that the era is over. And the question is there a realistic middle ground? I don't think there is a world in which the Blazers can take Brandon Miller at 3. They can take whoever at 23. They can make that selection that they have at 43 and bring 3 rookies in and say, Dame, Brandon Miller rocks. Shaedon Sharpe is really good, and and Anthony Simons is ready to be take that next step. And we traded Nurk for take your random center, right? Like we swapped out Nurk for Brook Lopez. It's like a weird, Brook Lopez is a free agent. That doesn't even make sense, but I don't think you can do that, right? I don't think you can bring multiple rookies back, but I think there is some middle ground. And I think the middle ground is something like you find the right suitor that says the 23rd pick in the draft and Anthony Simons is good enough for us to trade you OG Anunoby if you include X and X future picks and Nasir Little. And then you say to Dame, hey, we're still going to take Amen Thompson. We're holding on to Shaedon Sharpe. We need young players to be good. This is our best chance to get a star, but we have been able to acquire one pretty darn good player in OG Anunoby. And Dame says, okay, this middle ground is fine. Let's do it. The problem with that middle ground is, what is the realistic chances that if you are trading with the Trailblazers and they offer you a first round pick in the draft, you say, cool, call me back when 3's on the table. Click. Because that's what I would do if I was haggling with this team right now, knowing what Dame has put out there. I would say, listen, you know that you have a better package. I know you have a better package. And when that better package is available, give me a call. Otherwise, I'll be shopping other places. Because without that thing to trade, without 3 to dangle, the Blazers package gets worse in a hurry. This is even assuming that they can trade, 5 second-round picks to unlock their pick from the Bulls, right? An idea that Sean Hyken of Rose Garden Report floated, kind of loosely sourced in a story that he wrote about the Blazers' options to unlock some of their picks. That's an interesting idea, and particularly if it's sourced from someone within the Blazers, which the article seemed to suggest. But, I don't believe that. I don't think the Bulls would do that. If they do, cool. That's dope. The Blazers are going to be in good shape. But let's just say that you can pull that off. Does 23 and some future picks get you there? It might. It really might. but it still becomes a challenge to negotiate with 3 in hand, and other teams say, cool, we'll wait, or cool, we'll go somewhere else because we can get 12 in this draft for OG Anunoby or whatever it might be. 10 from Dallas or whatever it is. I don't really think Dallas has a pack. I just throwing a name out there. So I think where I land with this is that when I kind of walk through it, and part of this is informed, quite frankly, I did a bunch of fake trade stuff, and I did episodes that are back in your feed waiting for you. Go check them out with Sean Woodley of Locked On Raptors, about Pascal Siakam, did a fake trade show about Mikal Bridges, talked about a potential fake trade for the Blazers, trade 3 and 6 for 6 and 11 from the Orlando Magic. None of my colleagues with the Locked On Blazers valued the 3rd pick or Anthony Simons particularly highly. I was stunned by that, blown away by that. I really thought that was a sweet package. I thought it was a no-brainer for Mikal Bridges, and Doug Norrie over at Locked On Nets said, no thanks. I offered 3 in Yusuf Nurkic to Philip Rossman Reich over at Locked On Magic for 6'11" and Wendell Carter Jr., and he said no to that with no haggling, just shot it down straight away with no haggling. I thought we might be able to squeeze another first-round pick out of the Magic in exchange for trading up to 3. These are just podcasters, right? They don't run NBA front offices, but I think in general, it is a good sort of measuring stick to say, like, the trade out there is hard, which makes me lean the more I do this exercise. And it's an imperfect exercise, to be sure. And I'm not even really weighing the fake trade stuff from the podcast particularly heavily in my fake exercise, but it's part of the data. It's like 2% of the data. That's giving some level of confidence. But if you don't find the right trade out there, the opportunity, or like the cost, opportunity cost isn't quite the right phrase, but like the cost of trading away 3 seems so obvious to regret so quickly that the more I do this, I think, yeah, like it's the obvious choice just because of all of the logic. But I also get, and I acknowledge that if me saying I would make this pick knowing that it might be the end of the Dame era, if that's like a non-negotiable for you and you want the Dame era to continue no matter what because of, because of some sort of the sort of existential feeling of what we owe the players we love as a fan, like I totally get that. I totally get that. But for me, when I walk this logic out, making the pick seems like the best choice. And I think what the Blazers should try to do is find a middle ground that allows them to draft a potential star and appease their current star and see if they can find a middle ground for now. Because if it takes a full teardown to draft at 3, it's probably still the right move in terms of just like overall organizational health. But it can be a tough decision. The obvious decision is an incredibly tough one. I think tomorrow's show, I will not argue against myself because I think doing this exercise has sort of made me land where I land. But I'm going to present on tomorrow's show, when you listen to it, is the case for trading this pick. The flip side of this coin. What I would argue against myself, the counterpoint to this, even if you've already listened to this one and you know kind of what I believe. Why don't you come back tomorrow and listen to that show? Tell your friends to do the same. I appreciate you listening. Talk to you soon.